My name is Mark Williams, and I'm from Seattle. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural forces before that night. I considered myself a logical man, a software engineer who only believes what his eyes see and his hands touch. But what happened to me and my friends in the Olympic National Forest changed everything. It was the fall of 2023. My friend David Thompson, his wife Sarah, and I decided to go on a 3-day camping trip. David is a professional photographer and was excited to capture the autumn landscape with its golden and red hues. Sarah is a novelist looking for inspiration in the embrace of nature. Our old friend Jason Miller, a nurse at the city hospital, also joined us. We arrived at the campsite around 4 in the afternoon. The place was truly stunning, giant pine trees surrounding us on all sides, and a small stream running about 200 meters from our site. The sky was clear, the air pure and refreshing. I felt happiness wash over me as I pitched my tent next to David and Sarah's. We spent the first few hours setting up camp and gathering firewood. David lit a beautiful fire as evening fell, and we sat around it eating dinner and talking about old memories. It was a perfect night until the strange things began. Around 11 o'clock at night, while we were exchanging funny stories from our college days, I noticed Jason had suddenly gone quiet. He was staring toward the forest behind me, his eyes wide as if he had seen something unbelievable. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. We all stopped talking and listened. At first I heard nothing but the distant stream and the rustle of leaves. Then I heard it, a faint whisper like someone talking far away. "Probably just the wind," Sarah said, trying to reassure herself more than us. But the whisper continued, gradually becoming clearer. It was a woman's voice, but it wasn't natural. It seemed to come from all directions at once, as if the trees themselves were speaking. David stood up and grabbed his flashlight. "I'll go check it out," he said with feigned confidence. I tried to stop him, but he insisted. He headed toward the forest and disappeared among the trees. Jason, Sarah, and I exchanged worried glances. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. We started calling his name, but there was no reply. Suddenly, we heard a deafening scream. It was David's scream, without a doubt. We all rushed toward the source of the sound, our hearts pounding violently. We found him after 2 minutes of frantic searching. He was standing in front of a giant oak tree, his face pale as death, his eyes fixed on something on the trunk. I approached him and saw what he was looking at. There was a carving etched into the tree bark, a very old carving that looked like it had been there for hundreds of years. It was the face of a crying woman, but her tears were red like blood. And stranger still, the carving was moving slowly, and as if the face was alive and watching us. It spoke to me," David said, his voice choked. "It said it died here 100 years ago, and its spirit is trapped in this forest. It said it wants help, wants someone to free it." At that moment, the whisper returned, louder this time. The words were clear. "Come, help me. I'm here, alone, cold." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I looked at Jason and saw the terror on his face. Even Sarah, who was always the bravest among us, was shaking violently. We decided to return to camp immediately, but the path seemed different. We were sure we had only walked a short distance, yet we walked for half an hour without reaching our tents. The moon was hidden behind clouds and the flashlight was starting to dim. I felt the forest becoming darker and gloomier, as if the trees were slowly closing in on us. Suddenly, Jason stopped. "Look," he said, pointing to the ground ahead of us. There were fresh footprints in the mud, but they weren't normal human footprints. They were very small, like a child's feet, but they were deep in the earth, as if the owner was very heavy. The prints formed a perfect circle, as if something had been spinning around itself repeatedly. We heard a crying sound coming from behind us. We turned and saw something that froze the blood in our veins. About 30 meters away, there was a woman in a long, dirty white dress, standing between 2 trees. Her long black hair covered her face completely. She was crying, but her crying sounded more like the howl of a wounded wolf. She slowly extended her hand toward us, and her fingers were unnaturally long and gray, like the branches of a dead tree. We ran. We ran as fast as our legs could carry us without looking back. We could hear the sound of quick footsteps chasing us, branches snapping under the feet of something running behind us. David was gasping heavily and Sarah was crying from terror. After what felt like hours of running, we suddenly reached our tents. The fire was still burning, but it had turned blue, a pale and strange hue. We all crowded into my tent. It was the largest. We zipped it shut tightly and sat huddled in the middle, shivering from fear and cold. We could hear the whisper circling the tent and the sound of fingernails scratching the fabric from the outside. This continued until dawn broke. When the sun rose, we cautiously stepped outside. There was no trace of our nocturnal visitor, but we found something horrifying. On the outside fabric of the tent, words were scratched with fingernails. "Why did you run? I just wanted help." We quickly gathered our things and left the place. We never looked back, but even today, a full year later, I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing a whisper coming from my bedroom window. And the image of the woman in the white dress never leaves my memory. We haven't gone camping since that day, and I don't think we ever will again. David still suffers from nightmares, and Sarah refuses to even talk about that night. As for Jason, he left his job at the hospital and moved to another city, far from any forests. And me? I'm writing this story now, hoping it will help me get rid of the terror that inhabits me. But deep down, I know that some things, once you see them, stay with you forever. My name is Emma Sullivan, and I'm a history teacher at a high school in Portland. I've loved nature since childhood, and often went on solo camping trips to enjoy the quiet and read books away from the city noise. I considered myself a brave woman, unafraid to stay alone in the forest. But my trip to Long Lake in northern Maine changed me forever. It was the summer of 2024. I heard about Long Lake from a colleague at work who said it was a magical and quiet place far from the usual tourist trails. I packed my bags and set off in my car on a Friday morning. The trip took about 4 hours, mostly via narrow dirt roads surrounded by dense pine trees. The weather was beautiful, the sky clear blue, the air crisp. I arrived at the lake around 2 in the afternoon. It was indeed beautiful, its surface a clear blue surrounded by trees on all sides. There was a small campsite on the shore with a stone fire ring and an old wooden table. It looked like the place hadn't been used in a long time. I got out of the car and began pitching my small tent. I spent the rest of the day exploring the area. I walked around the lake, took some photos, and read a book on the shore. The place was quiet to an almost eerie degree. I didn't hear any bird sounds, which was strange for a forest. Even the wind seemed unnaturally faint, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination that I wasn't used to true isolation. As evening fell, I lit a small fire and prepared my dinner. I sat by the fire, gazing at the lake under the moonlight. The moon was full that night, beautiful and bright. But something strange caught my attention. The moon wasn't reflected on the lake's surface. In fact, the lake didn't seem to reflect anything at all. Not the moon, not the stars, not even the surrounding trees. Its surface was pitch black, like a deep hole in the earth, swallowing all light. I felt a cold shiver despite the warmth of the summer night. I got up and approached the water's edge. I could see the lake bed clearly, maybe 2 or 3 meters deep, and then utter darkness beyond. The water was unnaturally clear, like liquid glass. I reached out to touch the water, and it was cold as ice despite the day's heat. Suddenly, I saw something at the bottom. It was about 5 meters from the shore, at a depth of maybe 2 meters. It looked like an old wooden box. I quickly stepped back. I hadn't expected to see something like that. I wondered if I should try to retrieve it, but something stopped me. An odd feeling washed over me, a feeling that the lake was watching me, that something beneath the water was watching me. I returned to my tent, trying to ignore it, but I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a knocking sound, steady and slow, like someone knocking on a wooden door. I sat up in my tent, trying to pinpoint the source. It seemed to be coming from the lake. I cautiously unzipped the tent and looked outside. The moon was still bright, but the lake's surface was still completely black. And the knocking was coming from underwater. I crept fearfully toward the shore. The sound was clear now. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 3 more knocks. It was coming from the exact spot where I had seen the wooden box. I wondered if someone was trapped underwater, but how could anyone survive underwater for that long? I hesitated for a moment, then took off my shoes and stepped into the water. It was so cold it took my breath away. I walked carefully toward the location of the box, the water reaching my waist. When I arrived, I saw the box clearly under the moonlight. It was a small wooden box, maybe half a meter long, tied with an old rope to a large rock. The box was trembling slightly with each knock, as if something alive inside was trying to get out. I reached my trembling hand toward the rope. It was old and frayed, but surprisingly strong. I pulled out a small knife from my pocket and began cutting the rope. It took a full 2 minutes, and the whole time, the knocking from inside the box continued, becoming faster and more urgent. When the rope finally snapped, the knocking stopped abruptly. I lifted the box from the water. It was heavy, heavier than I expected. I carried it to the shore and placed it on the sand. The box was made of dark wood, carved with strange symbols I had never seen before. They looked like ancient glyphs or writing in a language I didn't recognize. I took a step back, my heart pounding hard. Suddenly, the box began to shake, gently at first, then with increasing violence. I heard wood splintering from inside and the sound of a deep, raspy breath. The wooden lid was bending as if something powerful was pressing against it from within. I retreated further, on the verge of running. Then, with a cracking sound, the lid burst open. A thick black smoke poured out of the box, not like normal smoke, but like liquid darkness flowing into the air. The smoke formed an indistinct shape, like the shadow of a person standing before me, but it was taller than any human I'd ever seen, maybe 3 meters tall. It only had eyes, 2 glowing red eyes in the absolute darkness. I heard a voice in my head, not an actual voice, but like thoughts seeping into my mind. Thank you. 100 years. I've been waiting. 100 years underwater. And now you have freed me. I froze in place with terror. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs refused to move. The shadow advanced toward me slowly, its red eyes fixed on me. I felt an intense cold wash over me as it approached, not the cold of the weather, but a cold of the spirit, as if life itself was being drained from my body. What are you? I whispered with difficulty. My name is very old, forgotten by humans long ago. They imprisoned me here because they feared me. But I am not evil, I am just hungry, very hungry after all these years. The shadow extended its hand toward me. It wasn't a real hand, just a shadow in the shape of a hand. When it touched my shoulder, I felt an overwhelming weakness flood me, as if I hadn't slept in days. I realized it was draining my energy, draining my life. In a moment of desperation, I remembered something I had read in a book about ancient legends. It was said that old spirits fear the light of the moon reflected on water. I looked at the lake. It was still black, reflecting nothing, but the moon was still in the sky, fully bright. With the last ounce of my strength, I lunged toward the lake and fell into the shallow water. The moment my body touched the surface, I saw the moon suddenly reflect on the lake, bright and shining. I heard a deafening scream behind me, a scream that tore through the night silence. I turned and saw the shadow retreating rapidly, shrinking and returning to the box like smoke being sucked into a vacuum cleaner. I quickly closed the lid and placed a heavy rock on top. Then I sat on the shore, gasping, trying to catch my breath. I stayed there until dawn broke, staring at the box, which had become completely silent. In the morning, I took the box and tied it with the same rope, added an even heavier rock, and threw it into the deepest part of the lake. I watched it sink slowly until it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't sleep that night, nor the night after. I left immediately and returned to the city. I told the local authorities a vague story about finding a dangerous old box, but they found nothing when they searched. They said the lake was very deep, deeper than it looked, perhaps hundreds of meters in some places. I haven't camped alone since then, and I can't even look at any lake without remembering those red eyes. But worst of all, on some nights when the moon is full, I wake up hearing a knocking sound coming from the water faucet in my bathroom. 3 knocks, silence, then 3 more knocks. My name is Robert Hayes, and I'm a former soldier in the US Army. I served in Afghanistan and Iraq and saw plenty of terrifying things in my life. But nothing I witnessed in war prepared me for what happened at Silent Woods campsite number 17 in the Rocky Mountains. I had gone on a camping trip with my cousin Frank Miller and his young son Alex, who was 19. Frank wanted to strengthen his relationship with his son, and Alex wanted to prove to his father that he had become a man. I agreed to accompany them because I knew the area well and wanted to help Frank achieve his goal. We chose a remote area in the Rockies, far from campsites crowded with tourists. The trail was long and rough. It took a full day of hiking to reach the site. The place was truly beautiful, an open area among giant pine trees beside a small stream with a stunning view of a deep valley. There was an old wooden sign at the entrance to the campsite that read, Campsite number 17, Silent Woods. Established 1937. I noticed the one was slightly crooked, as if it had been added later. I didn't think much of it at the time. We set up our 3 tents in a triangle formation around the fire ring. Frank was excited, taking pictures of everything, while Alex seemed a little annoyed that he couldn't get a cell signal. The place is nice, Dad, but how many days are we going to stay here without internet? Alex grumbled. Frank smiled and said, That's the point, son. To get away from all that. As night fell, we lit a large fire and began grilling dinner. The sky was clear and full of stars. I felt peace for the first time in a long while. But around 10 o'clock that night, I noticed something strange. The stream suddenly stopped flowing. The familiar sound of running water had been part of the background noise of the place, but it vanished completely in an instant. An absolute silence fell. Did you notice that? I asked. Frank nodded, while Alex seemed uninterested. Maybe a large animal walked nearby and scared the fish, Frank said, trying to reassure us. But I felt something odd. It wasn't a normal silence. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. About an hour later, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps circling the campsite in a wide ring. I grabbed my flashlight and signaled for Frank to be quiet. The footsteps were clear, the sound of large feet crushing dry leaves and small twigs. Something was walking slowly around our tents, about 15 meters away. I shouted from the tent, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped immediately, dead silence for several seconds. Then we heard a sound I couldn't place. It was the sound of a child crying, a faint, sad weeping coming from the direction of the dry stream. I got out of my tent carrying my rifle. Frank came out too, but Alex stayed in his tent. "Stay here," I told Frank. I cautiously headed toward the source of the sound. The moon was bright enough for me to see clearly. I reached the stream. It was completely dry, as expected, but I saw something on its edge, an old rag doll, dirty and tattered, as if it had been buried and recently unearthed. I cautiously picked up the doll. It was strangely cold, as if it had been in a freezer. It had 2 blue eyes that glistened in the moonlight, almost appearing real. A shiver ran through me as I looked at them. Suddenly the doll's eyes moved and looked directly into mine. I dropped it in terror and stumbled backward. I heard Alex scream from the camp. I ran back as fast as I could and found Frank trying to open his son's tent. "He won't answer," Frank yelled. I yanked the tent zipper open and we found Alex sitting in the corner, his face pale as death, his eyes squeezed shut. He was mumbling unintelligible words. I shook him hard. "Alex, Alex, what happened?" He slowly opened his eyes and they were strange, hazy, as if looking at something not there. The doll told me," he whispered shakily. "It said this place isn't number 17. It's number 7. The number 1 was added by the guards after... Alex collapsed into a fit of hysterical crying. Frank and I looked at each other in horror. What did he mean? I looked back at the campsite sign. The word 17 was carved into the wooden plank, but as I noticed before, the 1 looked slightly different from the 7, as if added later to conceal something. I pulled out a knife and scraped the paint off the number 1. Underneath it, there was an old inscription burned into the wood. Camp number 7, Special Detention Facility, 1942 to 1945. The blood froze in my veins. I had heard of these camps. During World War II, the government set up internment camps for Japanese Americans, but some were more secret than others. Camps for experiments, for things no one wanted to talk about. Suddenly, sounds started coming from everywhere around us. The sounds of many footsteps, weeping, muffled screams. I looked at Frank and saw the same horror on his face. Alex was still crying in his tent. "We have to leave now," I said firmly. We started packing our things quickly, but every time we tried to pack something, it would disappear or move. My tent started collapsing on its own, and Frank's bag emptied its contents onto the ground despite being closed. Then we saw them. At the edge of the campsite, standing in a silent row, were about 20 human shapes. They wore torn, old clothes from the war era. Their faces were pale and their eyes vacant. They stood completely silent, watching us without moving. "Leave. Get away from here," a voice whispered in my ear, but no one was beside me. "Before the guards find you." "What guards?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The guards. They come every night at midnight, looking for escapees. But there are no escapees. Everyone died here, died in the experiments, and now no one can leave. No one." I looked at my watch. It was 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until midnight. "Frank, grab Alex and run," I yelled. Frank tried to pull his son from the tent, but Alex was rigid, refusing to move. "I can't. The doll says I'm one of them now. It said I look like a boy who died here named Kenji." I lifted Alex by force and carried him on my shoulder. The 3 of us ran away from the campsite, leaving most of our gear behind. Behind us, we heard the sound of sharp whistles, heavy feet running, and dogs barking. But when I glanced back for a moment, I saw no real dogs. I saw only shadows shaped like huge dogs with red eyes running silently after us. We ran for hours through the dark forest. The moon was our only light. Alex on my shoulder cried the whole way, repeating the name Kenji over and over. Frank was panting beside me, his face streaked with tears. As dawn broke, we finally reached our car, which we had left at the trailhead. I threw Alex in the back seat and Frank sat beside him. I sped down the dirt road and didn't stop until we reached the first small town. It took Alex 3 months to recover, but he was never the same after that night. The doctor said it was acute psychological trauma, but I know the truth. Alex still sees things others don't. Sometimes he talks to someone named Kenji as if he's standing right there, and he says Kenji thanks him for freeing him from camp number 7. I returned to the area a year later to try and understand what happened, but I couldn't find the campsite again. It was as if it had never existed. All I found was an old wooden sign lying on the ground reading, Campsite 17. But the number 1 was missing now, leaving only the number 7 deeply carved into the old wood. I can no longer go camping in any forest. Every time I try, I hear the guards' whistles in the distance, and I see the shadows of dogs with red eyes at the edge of my vision. And I remember that some places hold on to their memories forever, and that some crimes are never erased by the passage of time.